welcome to One Star Bazaar, where we review the movies critics hate. This week we are diving into our franchises category, as both of the films we're looking at have less than a 40% on Rotten Tomatoes. So we are looking at Super Troopers and its crowdfunded sequel, Super Troopers 2.
Specifically, we are watching the sequel, Super Troopers 2, which came out this past year. It was released in April of 2018.
And it's not a coincidence that it was released April 20th, 2018.
Yeah, fair enough.
They did that on purpose.
Released on 4/20. We will be mentioning the first one, but specifically watching the second one and kind of talking about the franchise as a whole and why they're apparently hated by critics so much. So these films were directed by J. Chandrasekhar, aka Ramathorn, in the film. Written by Broken Lizard, so just all of the guys, they're like a comedy troupe. Super Troopers 2 has a 32% on Rotten Tomatoes, while the original was 35%. So in both are kind of around that same mark.
And the synopsis for this movie is kind of long, I feel like. But so everyone's favorite law enforcement team is back by popular demand with the long-anticipated follow-up to the cult comedy classic Super Troopers. When an international border dispute arises between the U.S. and Canada, the Super Troopers are called in to set up a new highway patrol station in the disputed area. Unconventional police work follows, and the result is Super Troopers 2. Now, this movie is a little bit unique in that it was crowdfunded, and if you're curious about that, Google it because it is kind of interesting. So let's see what critics had to say. Chris Nashawati of Entertainment Weekly said, "You'd think with 17 years at their disposal, these guys would be able to come up with some jokes that weren't so half-baked and dumb. Alas, this is low-hanging fruit all the way." Bill Goody Coots, which is an amazing last name, of the Arizona Republic, said, "Ultimately, Super Troopers 2 is a bad movie, but to its fans, that's irrelevant." Which is probably going to be our problem.
Probably,
because
yes.
We liked the first one.
Yes.
And John DeFore of The Hollywood Reporter said, "Though less funny than the first, it will play well to those who are in the mood." So, I mean, I'm in the mood to laugh today, so.
So here's the thing. The original Super Troopers came out, so 17 years ago, like 2001.
Uh-huh.
We were in high school.
Yep.
So we were definitely within the age demographic that I think these movies with their humor appeals to.
You mean like the same kind of humor as Kung Pao and the Fist? Like just
No, but that's
the kind of dude.
But yeah,
this is like stoner humor.
This is like stoner, gross out humor, whatever you want to call that. I like Super Troopers when I saw it. I mean, it's we mentioned this in our Kung Pao episode earlier on, that there is the humor that essentially what you have is very quotable lines that become inside jokes. You know, you repeat the jokes to each other between friends. You know, you quote the lines, everyone laughs.
What are you talking about? Meow.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, right. Everyone knows that's seen it would be like, oh yeah, that's Super Troopers, awesome. I liked Club Dread. Club Dread, I like that one. I think their movies kind of got worse over time, was the thing.
Yeah, Beer Fest and
the Slammin'
Salmon didn't really live up to the.
That being said,
to be fair, their first movie, I forget what I think it's called, like Puddle Cruiser or something. It's not that great either. So I feel like Super Troopers and Club Dread are kind of the peak of Broken Lizard.
Right. Well, and the other thing we should mention too is, as we said, this movie was crowdfunded.
Yes.
Basically, for the longest time, and I believe I read this on their AMA that Broken Lizard did on Reddit about a year or so ago. Basically, people would be like, hey, why aren't you making this movie? Hey, why aren't you making Super Troopers 2? Why aren't you making... They want to make, they have a few ideas that they've mentioned. One being Weed Fest. That's kind of the spiritual sequel to Beer Fest.
I see.
And people are always asking them at wherever events, they're like, hey, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? And they're essentially like, well, go see our movies, support us financially, and when our movies make money, then we can make more of these movies. And that was why it was such a cool thing that this movie got crowdfunded. It kind of showed that there was a loyal fan base that was willing to say, hey, we want you to make this movie. And not just like, oh, it'd be cool if you did. A lot of people were like, yeah, I'll put up money to, actually see it happen.
Yeah, they put their money where their mouth was, for sure.
The other problem that I remember from their AMA them mentioning is this problem in Hollywood in general, which I think we've touched on before, that basically nobody wants to make lower to mid-budget movies.
Yeah.
Like, why would a movie or a studio would rather put up $200 million and hope to make $1 billion versus put up $20 million 10 times and hope that some of those movies each make $100 to $200 million. Because the fact of the matter is, those $20 million movies, they might only make like $30 or $40 million. The box office for Super Troopers 2 was a little over $31 million.
And the budget was $13.5 million. So it doubled.
Right. And the box office for the first Super Troopers was $23 million. So they did make more money. But again, this is a very niche audience, I guess. They'll go see it. There's certainly a loyal fan base that will give them the money. The question is, will it make enough money for them to prove to studios, hey, let us keep making movies?
Well, so in terms of making its money back, so the original Super Troopers, its budget was only $3 million.
And it made 20 something.
So to make $23 million is big. But again, studios, for them, $20 million isn't really worth it.
Right.
Like they want something that's going to make hundreds of millions of dollars, rather than something that's going to make them enough to make another movie of the same quality.
Right. Conversely, Club Dread had a budget of $8.5 million and only made $7.5. So,
well, I feel like horror comedy is a hard sell a lot of the times. Like one of the best, I think, horror comedy movies that has come out recently is Tucker and Dale versus Evil.
Yeah.
So that movie's hilarious, but I don't think
and well rated, right?
Yeah. I don't think it made that much money because it's not a movie that you need to go see in theaters. Like you can just as easily see it. So its budget was $5 million and it only made $4.7 million, but it has an 84% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Right.
And so 7.6 on IMDb. So people love that movie.
Horror comedy works, but it's kind of
it's not a moneymaker.
You expect it more as like a Netflix original versus a theater production.
Exactly.
Box office. So
yes. And in fact, Netflix actually has done a couple horror comedies in Little Evil, which is about Adam Scott becomes the stepdad of essentially Damien from The Omen.
Okay.
And it's funny. And then there's The Babysitter, which is also like the babysitter and a bunch of her friends decide to sacrifice the kid to Satan. Yeah. But yeah, no, both of those are pretty funny. And again, they kind of thrive in that made for streaming medium, whereas had you released it in theaters, it probably wouldn't have made that much money. And other sidebar, like if Netflix is willing to throw millions and millions of dollars at Adam Sandler to make movies on Netflix that get like 0%.
Yeah, like why don't they throw
money at Broken Lizard?
That's a good question. Okay,
Netflix, get it together.
I think that's enough of a preface. Let's go ahead and watch Super Troopers 2. Neither of us have seen this yet.
Let's watch it.
Okay.
So we just finished Super Troopers 2. And we'll just dive into our categories. I mean, obviously, since we have seen the previous movie, we're slightly invested in the characters.
Yes.
So I feel like, whether or not we care about the characters based on the acting is kind of inapplicable here.
Sure, I guess that makes.
I will say, like, we were making fun of the American accents in Patient Zero last time. There are some pretty bad Canadian accents in this movie, but that's like intentional.
Yes, the funny thing is, and I looked it up because I was curious. So Will Sasso and Tyler Labine are two of the Canadian Mounties who they kind of have shenanigans, run-ins with throughout the movie.
Yeah.
They're both Canadian. And they both have weirdly terrible, intentionally bad, I guess, supposed to be like stereotypical Canadian accents.
And then there's French Canadian accents, and there's stereotypical Canadian accents.
Right.
And then, I mean, in terms of whether or not things were kind of over the top, I think they definitely were. But again, when we had that with Kung Pao, it was like, it's intentionally over the top, so you can't really fault it too much.
Yeah, I mean, you're well, the thing is with comedy too, you're not trying to sell some dramatic, intense moments like with dramas.
You're just trying to get the laugh. So
the acting, I think it's easier to just kind of do your thing and kind of play just regular people in funny, ridiculous situations.
And then in terms of the story, it's essentially the same plot as the first movie.
Kind of. So when we read the tagline for it, which sounds dumb, like, to be honest, it's a pretty dumb concept. But here's the thing about comedies. Lots of comedies, both good and bad, have pretty ridiculously stupid setups, right?
So along with that, then, how engaging is this movie? Like, I found myself kind of wondering whether this would be funny to somebody who hadn't seen the first one.
Yeah, that's a good point, because like you say, we basically jump in not right where we left off from the second movie, but pretty close. In the first movie, they were highway cops. At the end of the movie, they take over the city police department because the city cops are all corrupt. Yeah. So then apparently they get fired.
Somewhere between that movie and this movie, they are no longer cops.
Yes, they're all fired. And so then they bring them in almost like we need temp cops to transition this. And so they bring them in, which is ludicrous, let's be honest. You wouldn't
let disgraced police officers police this area.
Yeah. It's almost like it was a joke PR kind of thing that nobody on either side of the governments actually thought would work out.
Yeah. And I mean, so with it being a comedy, I think it has kind of that same level of like forgiveness where you just kind of remember the things that are funny and they kind of carry you through the parts that are a little bit less entertaining. Yeah. I did feel like this movie felt long. Yeah. And I think because it was partially crowdfunded, they did a lot of kind of like homages to the fans or like callbacks that the fans of the first one would catch and understand. Right. Like there's a couple cameos that really only make sense in context of the first movie, and some like funny things that are callbacks to the first movie as well. So yeah, I kind of wish we'd watched this with somebody who hadn't seen the first one to see what the heck they thought. One of the other things this movie reminded me of as we were watching it, did you ever see Canadian Bacon?
That's the one where...
So it's John Candy and Rhea Perlman. The
president has a scandal and he decides to declare war on Canada because a war is kind of what can get you out of hot water with the American people.
Basically, yeah. So these Border Patrol people, played by John Candy and Rhea Perlman, they patrol near Niagara Falls and they get swept up in the war preparations against Canada. And I mean, I think that movie is funnier than this one. I don't know if it's because I like grew up with it, so I have like more of like a nostalgic view of it. But in looking it up, I was really surprised. So it's directed by Michael Moore, the documentarian, and it's his only non-documentary film.
And that movie is bad.
I didn't know it was bad. So in looking it up, I'm gonna don't Google it. No Googling. I'm gonna quiz you. Okay, so the movie came out in 1995. Okay. It has a score on Rotten Tomatoes, which I'm going to have you guess at the moment. Or did you look it up already?
I looked it up already.
Okay, so it's low. It's 14%. So it's our one-star movie. Yes. But here's my question to you. So its budget was $11 million.
And this one was 20.
I'll look it up.
I think
I don't remember. So Canadian Bacon budget $11 million.
Yeah.
How much money did Canadian Bacon make at the box office?
Like 80
million?
Yeah.
Okay. $178,000.
That's like less than Billionaire Boys Club. Which okay. That's it?
Yeah.
That can't be right. That has to be like the opening weekend, whatever.
That's what it says. I don't know.
Okay. All right.
I mean, the internet can be wrong.
No, well.
But that's what it says.
Box office.
That's what the internet is telling me.
No, you're right. That's what Google thinks.
Like, its opening weekend in the United States was $53,000.
Domestic total gross. This is 163,000.
Okay.
Opening weekend 53,000. It only opened in 14 theaters.
Yeah. So it's bad, but I remember seeing that movie on TV like all the time.
Well, probably because they were whoring themselves out to make all the money back that you spent.
So it was, I mean, it must have been the equivalent of like the filler movies that we're always talking about for the 90s.
Yeah. Well, and the sad thing is everybody remembers John Candy as this really beloved comedy, amazing actor.
Yeah, his movies weren't that great.
He was in a lot of bad movies.
Yep.
And I mean, I love him. You know, he was very funny, but yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like this movie, I mean, Canadian Bacon kind of gets more into spoof territory.
Right.
Where it gets a little weird with, like, they call back to, like, Close Encounters of the Third Kind and whatever that movie is that has that scene of, like, Jack Nicholson, like, dressed as kind of like a general and going all Few Good Men.
Few Good Men.
Yeah.
The You Can't Handle the Truth.
Yeah,
scene.
I think they, like, spoof that.
Yeah.
So that I feel like is more of a spoof movie, whereas this is just trying to be like a straight comedy.
Right.
But I don't know how successful it is as a comedy without the context of the first movie.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, especially, I mean, you don't get any idea of who these characters are outside of you already know who they are from the first movie.
I feel like it tried to like reboot itself. Like, it didn't seem original enough. Like, it seems like too much of recycling of what was in the first movie.
Yeah.
I don't know.
What shocked me was this movie didn't really have any catchy dialogue, quotable, repeatable joke lines.
That's true. Any ones they did have were just references to the first movie.
And that was really surprising because the first movie, that's what made it funny.
Yeah.
And what made people like it is that you could quote it.
Yeah.
Even if it was dumb humor that some people would be like, what are you guys doing? Like, there was that. I don't know what in here I would, do.
Yeah. They're really, I mean, we literally just watched this movie and I can't remember any of the funny parts.
You're totally right about a lot of the jokes in this are really just references to jokes in the first one. It's like a greatest hits album.
Yeah.
Except
that feel
the greatest hits are really, it's like if a band only had 2 or 3 good albums and it's like, hey, let's put out our greatest hits. And you're like, this is mostly just your one good album, with a couple of the other things mixed in.
Yeah. So one of the things that this movie does well then, I guess, is reference its predecessor.
Does that doing well?
Did it do anything else well?
I think it did stuff fine.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was acceptable. The quality of the filmmaking was perfectly adequate.
Right.
Okay, here's something that it did well. The dialogue, even when it wasn't funny, was natural.
Yeah, like
there were times where like they would be joking around and somebody would say something and I'm like, okay, as an outsider watching this as a comedy, that's not like I'm gonna start laughing funny, but it is the kind of joke if you were just like hanging out with your coworkers, somebody would make a joke like that and you'd be like, huh, yeah, good one, buddy.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the strengths that Broken Lizard has is that they have all been together for so long. They do have that natural chemistry that also plays well on camera, because sometimes people will have a chemistry in real life that doesn't quite translate on film.
Right.
But here, I think they definitely do have
that bro chemistry.
Yeah. So things that maybe aren't so funny still work because they do have that camaraderie with each other.
Yeah.
So I feel like this movie does have some flaws in that, it kind of relies too much on the original, and not sure how well it stands up on its own.
Yeah, I don't think it stands up on its own very well at all, to be honest.
Yeah. So are there other things that it does poorly? Just kind of as a general
It's just not
comedy?
as funny.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, the criticisms of this some of the criticisms of this film are that the jokes are low-hanging fruit, the jokes hit below the belt. It's your classic immature comedy criticisms. Yes, I get it. A 60-year-old film critic watching something is not going to find stuff funny that is supposed to appeal to a 17-year-old. But the problem is, I should think it's funny, and I didn't think it's as funny as it should be.
Yeah, I feel like the laughs were too far apart. And even some of the moments that you were laughing, I was just kind of
Yeah.
And some of the jokes, I didn't even get.
Right.
And I'm just why is that supposed to be? I couldn't even figure out why it was supposed to be funny.
So,
it's not even a joke that failed. The whole thing with Thorny's mustache.
Oh, the
mustache
loss?
toupee.
Because he was taking women's estrogen hormone
and then also,
pills.
why is that funny?
I don't know.
Although one thing I will say in comparing this one to the first one is that I feel like the first one relied on a lot more drug and sex jokes, whereas I feel like this one was a lot more just bro humor with the nut shots and the tasing, relying more on physical comedy rather than smart comedy.
Oh no, there's definitely not a lot of smart comedy here.
Yeah,
and that's the funny. It's almost embarrassing that I laughed at a few spots that the guy gets tased in the junk, and you totally know it's coming, and it was still funny. And I don't, it's not clever. It's like a guy stepping on a rake, but you're just it's just classic dumb comedy. And I'm like, okay, I'll laugh at it.
I'll giggle. So what's kind of your overall feeling about this movie?
I'm honestly surprised that this has only slightly lower rating than the first one, because I would say the first one is vastly superior to this film.
Yeah, I in terms of giving it a regular out of 4 stars, I feel like the first one I think is a 3 probably for me.
Yeah,
and this one is
it's a 3 graded on a curve.
Yeah,
for if you like this kind of film, you'll think it's good.
Yeah, whereas this one I feel like I can't give it a 2. You know, it's a 1.5.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
I really want to like this.
I did want to like it.
I know that these guys have potential.
And I love some of their other movies. I do. Club Dread, I think, until Tucker vs. Dale came out, Club Dread was kind of the most fun you could have in a horror comedy.
By the way, I think it's hilarious that you brought up Tucker and Dale versus Evil, because the guy who is in that movie, who's not Alan Tudyk, I don't know if he's Tucker or Dale, whatever, is in this film. He's one of the Mounties. Setting aside Broken Lizard as well, there are other people, tertiary characters in this film that I know are legitimately funny. Will Sasso, with the horrible accent that you were talking about.
Horrible accent.
The big one.
Okay.
Of the three Mounties, the one that was the biggest one.
Yes.
And bald.
Yeah.
Okay. Will Sasso, who plays the Mountie, like, he was on Mad TV. And he was legitimately hilarious on that show. Did you ever watch that? It was in its heyday. It was, I think, a legitimate like competitor with SNL.
So do you kind of have the same problem with this one that you had with Bird on a Wire, in that like Goldie Hawn and Mel Gibson were so much better in other movies that it made Bird on a Wire disappointing? So with this movie,
I'd say that to the same effect, and even probably more so for this.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because
you know how high their bar can be,
this was just
and it's not
a letdown compared to Super Troopers, the first one.
Yeah. So maybe it does kind of fall into that trap of the sequel is never as good as the original. So I feel like, I mean, like I said, I only don't want to give this movie a 1 star because I wanted to like it so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I feel like and surprisingly, I mean, this movie is one of the higher rated Rotten Tomatoes scores
that we've done. That's what surprises me, honestly. Basically,
and on Metacritic too, this movie isn't less than 40. It's higher than 40 on both.
I'm sad.
I'm also kind of sad.
If Super Troopers, I mean, we don't have cable, but if we're just flipping through TV and Super Troopers is on, I'm watching it. If Super Troopers 2 is on, what else is on?
Yeah, and I feel like that's kind of what we can take away from this whole experience is, I mean, there's the first one is also still a 1-star movie. But
that's undeserved, I think.
That is definitely
by our standards, it's a 1-star movie, and there certainly are critics out there that were like, this movie sucks.
But yeah, no, the original one is funny, and
it's hilarious.
It has so many moments where it shines, and I feel like with that one, the laughs definitely outweigh the groans. Like,
well, I think the first one also. I think the first one gets a little boost because it feels more like an indie movie.
Maybe. But since both are, by our criteria, 1-star movies,
yes,
Super Troopers, the original one, is definitely watchworthy.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't deserve to be 1-star. Super Troopers 2, on the other hand, just skip it.
Well,
it has... I feel like if you loved the first one like we did, you're just going to be disappointed watching this movie.
Maybe. That's kind of the conundrum, right?
Are expectations too high?
Maybe. I think the conundrum is basically, if you love the first one, you might like this.
There are funny moments that...
Just because you might be like, hey, I really love the first one, and I really want to see, what's going on with those characters and stuff, to revisit it. But at the same time, you're right. You might be like, oh, I wish... I mean, okay, I don't think this is like the Matrix sequels, if they exist, which, I don't think...
Some people say
I don't. They don't. I mean, they only made one Matrix movie, right? I don't think this is like that. Like, no, just they are offensive to the first one. This isn't that bad.
Yeah.
This is just not as good. It's very clearly, like, not a good movie.
And
it's not a horrible movie,
I wasn't bored, like, it's not like I regretted watching it.
Right.
It kept my interest enough. It's
just disappointing because it can be better.
Yeah.
You're like a parent. You're like, I'm not mad at you. I'm just disappointed, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not angry. I just know you have more potential than this, Billy. Yeah. How much comedy do you think a movie needs to be good? Like, if you laugh 6 times in an hour and a half, is that, like, what's the, you know what I mean? Like, what's the point where you're like, all right, that's, like, a comedy special. There's some comedians, I'm just constantly laughing. It's almost too much, Like, it's like, I gotta catch my breath here. Like, it's...
So there have been comedies where I've laughed, like, almost the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
And then there have been comedies where one thing was funny enough
right
that it made the whole movie worth it.
That's what I was just thinking too, is I feel like the problem is with a comedy, it's almost like we say, it's kind of easy for the comedy to gloss over a weak story.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is when there's not enough comedy, then the weak story is more apparent. And I feel like actually the problem with this movie is the comedy is too weak to support the weak story. And if either one of them had been better, this movie would have been better.
Yeah.
If the storyline had been actually clever and not just kind of like, hey, let's just do the same thing.
Yeah, they just recycled the first one. But in the first one, the comedy was there to support it.
Right.
Whereas, yeah, here, it's just the same story as the first one, essentially. And there's less comedy to bring it up.
Not to mention, like, I'm sorry, in the first one, I feel like the story was better.
It also had, like, layers.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, you uncover one thing, and then there's this other thing, and then this other thing is a part of it too. And yeah, it's more.
This exciting. One, they were just like, I wonder who the bad guy is. And then the bad guy's like, I'm the bad guy, and you're like, well, that's not at all surprising because we've only met about 3 people in this whole movie, so. You know, it was either going to be you or there's no one else that could have been. Like some new random person that we've never met. You know, right?
Yes.
There weren't enough characters in this film to make it a surprise.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's really the problem is basically there wasn't enough original humor.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the jokes were really just callbacks to the first one. And the storyline itself, the plot was just kind of weak. It was meh. It was like, really, in 17 years, that's what you... Okay. I mean, the potential was there. There were some things that weren't very funny, but it could have been.
But it just makes it so much more disappointing when you see that potential.
I know.
It doesn't live up to it.
I know.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of One Star Bazaar. As always, you can visit us on social media to let us know what you think and make suggestions for what we should watch next. Be sure to contribute to our Patreon page if you want exclusive access to patron-only bonus content.
Please join us next week where we will be watching and discussing one of the 90s biggest box office blunders, a film which did so poorly it bankrupted a previously successful production company.
That's a feat.
Yes.